Hey everybody, welcome back to another Q&A on November 2nd, 2023. It's going to be a little short one this week. I didn't leave the question box up for too long, but we do have a handful of questions. It looks like maybe 4 or 5. Okay, so the first question pertaining to HRT and menopause. So they ask, is there an age limitation for women to start HRT, or is it in relation to their last menstruation? I'm assuming what they're asking is there kind of a minimum age that a female would want to start HRT, or is it just related to their last menstruation? That's how I'm interpreting that question. Hopefully that's correct. The short answer to that would be definitely definitely no age limitation, because last menstruation would be correct thinking, but last menstruation is not always going to be related to menopause in the normal sense. So we think of, a typical female menstrual cycle, like life cycle, if you will, and maybe ending menstruation in their 50s or somewhere around there, whatever it may be. That's not necessarily the case. There are cases of hormonal suppression much younger than that's difficult to bring back, to repair, to restore. So there are cases where HRT could be a viable option then. There are considerations around that, of course, fertility, things of that nature, especially if you're younger. But with that being said, that's not to say that you have to wait to your last menstruation to start HRT as well. There are some women that are in that premenopausal phase that are very close. Things are starting to get off. They're starting to see changes in LH and FSH as you would in menopause. They're starting to see changes in their sex hormones, and they decide that they want to go ahead and pursue that because inevitably it's something that they're potentially going to need anyhow. So they could go ahead and start prior to that last menstruation, right? So, the idea of the last menstruation is a correct train of thought that could occur in so many different areas. There are other considerations depending on age bracket, and there are also cases where they may want to pursue HRT prior to that. So really context related, of course, like everything else, but those are some things that I would think about. Can you carb load while on clenbuterol, or is that a myth? The answer is yes, you absolutely can. The actual mechanism of it's not going to necessarily cause any negatives in terms of being able to uptake glycogen and things of that nature. Kind of what you're trying to accomplish with your carb loading. However, some people do tend to think that you would want to remove things that are going to increase metabolic rate too much and make it difficult for you to retain what you're eating, in the sense that you're not burning through it. I could understand that train of thought, except for the fact that I would be a little leery of changing too many variables with the metabolic rate. So we're talking about things like fat loss supplementation, whether it be something stimulatory or even like exogenous thyroid or things like that. Because if you have an idea of the amount of carbohydrate or amount of dietary fat or whatever it might be that you want to introduce because of previous refeeding or testing or whatever it might be, then you're throwing off that environment by changing those variables that were there when you tested it out, or you were doing refeeding or whatever. So that would maybe throw your potential calculations off. However, there are instances where it's definitely warranted to go ahead and remove that, more from a systemic fatigue point of view. Not really from a carb loading point of view, just from a systemic fatigue point of view, it's probably beneficial to bring it out. And honestly, we're not talking a 10 or 20% difference in metabolic rate or anywhere even close to that. Very low single digit percentages in BMR, if anything, right? So it's not like removal of that is going to make or break your numbers per se, but you don't have to remove it. You can if it's beneficial, but you don't have to. It's not going to make it impossible to fill out. How do you recognize and attack or address high histamine? Histamine is coming from mast cells, which do produce other amines, but histamine is just one of the more predominant amines, and the one that people are generally most familiar with when it comes to reactions, right? It's going to look like an allergic reaction, more or less. It doesn't have to manifest acutely in the sense that you eat something and then you break out in hives. It can, though. I've seen this in more than one case where someone does literally have an allergic type of reaction to a food. And I'm not talking about them having a food allergy, like a peanut allergy. I'm talking about they were able to eat this food prior with no problems, and now they cannot because they're having this additional histamine reaction. So they don't maybe have an allergy in the common sense that people, or the literal sense like people would think of, but now they are unable to eat those things, and they do literally break out in hives. Or they break out in hives during stressful periods of time. Doesn't have to be hives. I mean, it can be any skin issues, any dermatology type issues are pretty common. Swelling, excessive watering in the eyes, really like any allergy type symptom is generally histamine related. So it doesn't mean you have an environmental allergy, but you have you have high histamine for some reason. And that would explain also as to how you would address it. What is that reason? I wouldn't be able to sit here and tell you exactly what the course of action would be on that. But what I can say is that there's almost always an underlying cause unrelated to histamine. So there is something called mast cell syndrome where you are overproducing. However, mast cell syndrome in most cases is related to things like hormones, especially estrogen, hormone detox, GI issues, autoimmune issues. So usually the majority of what you need to do to address histamine really boils down to those areas and not the histamine itself. However, you can do things like lowering histamine intake in the diet and lowering foods that liberate histamine from the body, or slow down DAO, which is involved in metabolizing histamine. So you can do things dietary wise that will definitely help. You can attain food lists and things online that will help you with that. You can utilize supplementation. There are some things that will help: bromelain, quercetin, vitamin C, DAO, potentially straight DAO. Now, I wouldn't just arbitrarily start throwing things at your problem unless you understand what it is, but there are things that can probably help. Now, those things might not necessarily address the underlying cause, so they, of course, will assist the process, but you still need to investigate what might be driving it. Okay. Someone asks, is it in prep or on prep? That's funny, because I was just talking about this with this person the other day. Oh man. So I know a lot of people say on prep, but to me it's in prep. I think I'm like actively in this process of doing it. On it makes me feel like it's an object, like it's a supplement, like you're taking a fat burner. Like, this is prep. I'm doing it and I'm taking it. But in it means I'm doing it or I'm involved in it. So I don't know. On prep doesn't make sense to me. And maybe grammatically I'm like 100% incorrect, but I do know a lot of people say on prep, but to me it makes a lot more sense to say in prep, but grammatically I could be way off. So nobody shoot the messenger on this one. I'm just telling you what makes sense to me, but that is a funny question. Not that it matters. Y'all do your thing. If you want to call it in prep or on prep, doesn't make any difference. But that is it. Like I said, guys, just short and sweet one today. I appreciate everyone tuning in. If you would like to check out any of my other Q&As, they are all on my YouTube channel. Check them out.